Episode 2 of Behind Enemy Lines is now underway. Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated. I'm Adam Prescott, pleased to be joined today by Mark Wogenrich over at All Penn State as we continue highlighting some of the world of recruiting at Ohio State's rivals across the Big Ten and beyond. Mark, really appreciate you take a few minutes with us today. Glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Let's just start with more of a zoomed out look here at the Nittany Lions. They've been consistently finishing with, top 15, top 20 recruiting classes. Right now, they currently stand at 32. Obviously, there's a lot of time left, a lot of available targets. What does Penn State have to do to kind of get back up there where we're usually accustomed to seeing them?
Yeah, I think that's probably just a function of the circumstance, too. This wasn't going to be a real big recruiting class for them, maybe in the range of 18, 19 guys. I think they have 13 commits right now. They just don't have a lot of seniors to replace on their current roster. So they were looking at a smaller class, so it probably wasn't going to be as highly ranked. But I think it would really help maybe just perceptionally to get two of the really good players out of Pennsylvania who are still available, and Nolan Rucci, the lineman from Central Pennsylvania, whose father Todd played at Penn State, and Derek Davis, a defensive back in Western Pennsylvania. I think they're two of the top 5 guys coming out of Pennsylvania. It really, that Penn State, Ohio State recruiting thing going back and forth. I know I say this kind of jokingly, but I think for some Penn State fans, the idea of Justin Fields throwing this year to Julian Fleming probably is almost enough to say, oh, good, I'm glad this season has, been postponed. They didn't want to see that at Beaver Stadium in October. I think if Penn State, this class, I don't know if it's going to be a top 10, top 15 class. It's probably going to finish where it will, and I don't think that's a problem. They're going to be turning to 22. They've already got a good start on that. I think they're really going to be pushing hard for that recruiting class, and hopefully they get the visits back because that's such a huge part for Penn State. The recruiting visits are really big. I remember being at Penn State one year over the summer, and it was for an event, and the coaches just started twittering around each other saying bonsai, bonsai, and then they just disappeared. And that meant that there was a prospect who would come to the building, and when that happens, they give each other this kind of notification. It's their siren. They say bonsai, and every available staff member goes to the front door of the building to greet the player, the prospect, and his parents. I mean, that's everybody: coaches, recruiting staff, whoever's in the building. They go and they do the greeting. They're really good at the in-house visit and the campus visit. So not being able to do those two things, while I'm sure James Franklin is killing it with the Zoom calls with parents and recruits, it's just not the same. So, going back to the beginning, I think if they can add Derek Davis Jr. and Nolan Rucci, that would be a big boost to this class. Well, I think actually does have some pretty good players already.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Buckeyes after those two guys as well. So it's going to be really interesting dynamic to see how that all settles. Easily Penn State's biggest commit so far in the 2021 class is offensive tackle Landon Tengwall, number 1 player in Maryland, arguably 6'6", over 300 pounds. Many figure him to be a top 75, top 100 player, regardless of position. Talk to me a little bit more about what he brings.
Yeah, I remember reading the SI All-American evaluation that called him basically that classic Big Ten lineman who can go in and out inside a guard, probably his best position. But probably can play tackle too for them. This kind of continues a really good offensive line recruiting run for them. This would have been a really good offensive line for Penn State this season with 4 returning starters, including Rasheed Walker, and Michael Mennett, 2 guys who kind of really helped re-kick off that offensive line recruiting run for them. And Tengwall coming in with a new offensive line coach and Phil Trautwein. One of the things Trautwein has said he likes is having kind of the offensive line punching skill, the guys who are really good with their hands. And it sounds like Landon Tengwall, he's from watching some of his video and from his scouting report, is really good at that sort of thing, really good at that kind of point of contact with his hands. I think he's got a real high ceiling in that group.
Yeah. Perhaps the most notable position that has evolved at Penn State in recent years has been the tight end spot. Obviously, Freiermuth. He and Mike Bowers combined for 10 receiving touchdowns last year. You have a few. Bowers has now moved on. Freiermuth is still there. You have a few more guys, multiple guys committed in some of these recent classes. how bright is the future at that position, and how do you see that, evolving?
Oh, it's enormous. Yeah, and even going back to guys like Mike Gesicki, who kind of got this latest run started. They've had good tight ends for years. Tony Stewart and Andrew Corliss, a bunch of NFL tight ends predating them. Mike Gesicki is terrific and is having a strong start to his career with the Miami Dolphins. But one of the guys I was looking forward to seeing this year the most is Pat Freiermuth. I think he had a breakout potential for maybe a 50-catch season. He was going to be tremendous this year. And he came back. I mean, he was NFL draft eligible in 2020, and he returned because he wanted a year of college. It'll be interesting to see what he does as a first-round draft pick. I think it would behoove him, obviously, to go. But it just wouldn't surprise me if he decided, look, I want to play another college football game. So whatever happens, however that next college football game is played, if it's played in November, or if it's in January, maybe he does. Maybe he just wants to get some closure to finish that off. And then to see him with a guy like Zach Kuntz, who's a 6'7" tight end, incredibly athletic, really good basketball player. I was interested to see how those guys would mesh in Kirk Ciarrocca's new offense. It didn't use a lot of tight ends at Minnesota, but obviously he was going to adapt with these two guys, and they're two terrific receiving tight ends. And I think one guy to watch in the future is Theo Johnson. He's a freshman who enrolled this year, might be the best, ultimately might be one of the better tight ends they ever produce. I think he's probably that good.
Yeah. Obviously, you always want to win your backyard in recruiting, and Penn State's done a good job within state lines there. Pennsylvania, obviously, guys get away, with every state and every class or whatnot. But outside of Pennsylvania, you see Michigan and Ohio and Virginia. We just talked about a guy from Maryland and Tang. Where do you think Franklin's had the most success or feels most comfortable out of state?
I think it's definitely Maryland, and Penn State has a long history of recruiting in Maryland. You can go back to Larry Johnson when he was at Penn State, recruited Maryland exceptionally well, and obviously brought that to Ohio State. But this team, it had some really, really good players from Maryland with Tariq Castro-Fields at cornerback, who's potentially a draft pick. Daniel George, I think, had a chance to be one of their breakout guys at receiver. Two guys on their lines, Rasheed Walker, who I mentioned before, at tackle. I mean, he's getting noticed now as potentially a first-round draft pick. And I think defensive tackle P.J. Mustipher is going to be really, really good. They've recruited Maryland well, like I said, for a long time. It even goes back kind of to 2005 when Penn State got Derek Williams coming off its fourth losing season. I think they were 4-7 in 2004. 4 losing seasons in 5 years. The program was just in really a flat state. And Derek Williams, who was the nation's #1 recruit from Greenbelt, Maryland, went on ESPN and said, I'm going to Penn State and I'm going to bring a national championship back to State College. And that kind of kicked things off. Yeah. That moment I think was really big. And to get him out of Maryland, I'm still looking forward to seeing how that recruiting battle between James Franklin and Mike Loxley in Maryland, that's going to be really interesting to watch. I know they value Maryland tremendously. It's in a really important recruiting spot, especially since some Pennsylvania talent has been going elsewhere, and also the depth just hasn't been there as it has in the past.
Yeah. So say what you want about recruiting, or wherever Penn State finishes, they've certainly played Ohio State well in recent years. Mm-hmm. A couple 1-point losses, they beat them once. So once they get on the field, it's going to be really interesting. I'm
going to miss that October game. Absolutely.
Yeah, always a good matchup between the Nittany Lions and the Buckeyes. Mark Wogenrich from All Penn State, we really appreciate you giving a little bit of your time here to catch up on the recruiting world. Be well, and hopefully we can talk to you again soon.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.